Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a special English broadcasting, especially reminding those Koreans living abroad, also thinking of presidential election, and who are so much worried about the South Korea's international positions after a leftist government continued to damage the democratic governance system of South Korea. And especially today, I want to talk about the meaning of Ukrainian crisis and its impact on the presidential election, which is to be held on March 9th here in South Korea. Today, President Moon Jae-in held National Security Council meeting regarding talking about the Ukrainian crisis, and they decided that they are not considering sending military troops or any military support, even though the allied nations are requesting South Korea to consider helping with more, active means, But the Blue House today, after NSC meeting in the Blue House, they concluded that they won't, send military troops or they are not considering any military options, even though our allied nations, including the United States, are requesting South Korea to help those allied forces with more active means or ways and means there. And as of now, I heard that at least last Saturday there are 68 South Korean nationals remaining there, and also many diplomats of G7 nations and Western countries are coming out of the country because of a high tension there, high possibility that war could break out anytime in the future. And this is a very important signal for those South Korean voters thinking of national security here. Ukrainian military crisis are sending a very positive signals to those conservative voters in South Korea, thinking that we have to consolidate more KoreaUS Alliance system because we are divided nations, and all the threat coming from North Korea with missiles and weapons of mass destruction. So I think more and more voters with this kind of concept, especially regarding national security, are turning to more conservative orientation when they go to voting stations, because KoreaUS Alliance system has been in some sense weakened. Leftist government has been trying to reduce the size of KoreaUS combined military drills, and even saying that North Korea will never threaten South Korean nationals' lives if we continue to keep those paper agreement by the name of Panmunjom Declaration or 919 military basic agreement, something like that. And as we understand, as of now, the Ukrainian crisis is teetering on the edge of war as of now. And last Monday, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a bill endorsing the separation and independence of Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, set up by pro-Russian rebels in the Donbas region, in eastern Ukraine and ordered the Russian forces to march on the country. And the skirmishes took place there, in the Donbas region, between the rebels and Ukrainian government forces. If the Russian army moves into Ukraine in full operation, massive casualties are unavoidable. And this is a very crisis moment, I think. And we are worried that the crisis will surely push up international oil and grain prices if Russia shut down all the pipelines carrying gas to Europe, and the gasoline prices in Korea already surged to 2,000 won per liter from 1,800 won, something like that. And to make matters worse, there are concerns that an invasion by Russia could be a prelude to another third world war, something like that. And the United States and Europe are sending reinforcement to neighbors of Ukraine while strengthening sanctions on Russia. And due to the possibility of large-scale civilian damages, including over 1 million war refugees, all of Europe is very much tensed up, as more than 60 Ukrainians of Korean descent, still remain in the country as of now. And President Moon Jae-in hurriedly, he held a National Security Council meeting, and on Tuesday, and he, however, concluded that even though we are considering emergent measures, they are probably helping moving all the South Korean nationals out of the country, even though G7 countries and especially core members of NATO are more militarily united, to prevent Russia from attacking in a massive operation into Ukrainian region. Our government is not considering sending any military forces, or also helping them with more active military means or something like that. The Ukrainian crisis is not a distant problem, and our government must grasp the essence of it. Ukraine is threatened by Russia because of the confusion and the division of its domestic politics. And as NATO are more worried about their security concerns than Europe, especially thinking of those military collaboration schemes of Russia, People's Republic of China and North Korea, trilateral, conservative, traditional military alliance there. South Korea, which is a divided nation, is particularly, much more worried, by side effect of those international war politics there. So I'm thinking of a bad precedent, because this crisis could set a bad precedent for North Korea, and also in the post-Cold War period. Ukraine was ensured of its security in return for completely abandoning its more than 5,000 nuclear weapons through the 1994 Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. It signed with the US, Britain, and Russia, watching the Ukraine without any nukes being invaded by Russia. North Korea could be even more determined to develop nuclear weapons, and this crisis is sending a lot more dangerous signals to the Korean Peninsula. So the international community must stop Russia from assailing Ukraine further in the future. And given the possibility of North Korea making provocations while the US is handling the Ukrainian crisis there, especially before the presidency election here on the Korean Union, our South Korean leftist government must prepare for any contingency, any emergent happenings, possible happenings. So our geopolitical risks from powerful neighbors resemble those of Ukraine in many aspects, and as we have stressed repeatedly, there is no better way to reduce such risks than a solid Korea-US alliance, as Chungang Daily editorial conclude. We need a more stronger alliance system with the United States, and we cannot rely on any paper agreement, like Panmunjom Declaration or a possible peace agreement between the Koreas in the future. Only our strong military preparedness and our strong alliance politics in terms of military combined operations, this could give us more, security devices, for the 52 million South Korean lives here. And I think as overseas voting begins, probably this kind of international crisis is influencing the voting orientations into more conservative, aspect. And I'm sure that this Ukrainian crisis is also influencing the South Korean presidential election result in the coming March 9th presidential election. And hopefully those voters in the middle ground probably thinking of this kind of security crisis could turn to a more conservative orientation, possibly helping largest opposition party presidential candidate Yoon Suk-yeol securing more voting numbers in the coming presidential election. And as we understand, overseas elections take place at 219 polling stations at 177 diplomatic missions in 115 countries worldwide. And as of now, there are about, I think, 226,000, more than 226,000 voters, registered overseas already. And this kind of voters probably will be much more influenced by this kind of military crisis in Ukraine. And I think these kind of more than 2 million overseas voters are much more worried about security situation on the Korean Peninsula, as I have analyzed that probably the U.S. focus on Ukraine region could reduce their military preparedness on the Korean Peninsula, more dividing United States military capacity, sending more concentration into the Ukrainian region. And Yoon Suk-yeol, the candidate of the main opposition People's Power Party, said that we will expand the support for the educational programs such as those for Hangul schools and establish an office for overseas Koreans to improve the overseas election system, something like that. As I told you, because those more than 2 million voters are beginning to cast a ballot. But instead of this kind of small election policy promises, I want Yoon Suk-yeol, the largest People's Power Party candidate, should say that we need more tighter and combined security assurances from our allied forces, including the United States, Japan, and possibly Australia, and those G7 countries. And we had better directly join in Quad or AUKUS, as the United States is pushing up with those Indo-Pacific military strategies, and they have been requesting South Korean government to join in their military schemes, especially checking and balancing those rising powers of the Chinese Communist Party. And as of nowadays, the military cooperation between Moscow and Beijing is more intensified. So I think this kind of Ukrainian crisis are sending a lot of signals to those South Koreans overseas and the South Korean voters within domestic region, and possibly thinking that, well, we need more stronger Korea-US alliance in the future, and that could, I think, help Yoon Suk-yeol, the largest opposition party's presidential candidate, win more support, from those, voters in the coming March 9th presidential election. And I think that we have to think always, those, very, very dangerous security variables, when we decide the future of South Korean destiny, especially we are in the middle of, deciding what kind of government South Korea will have after the coming March 9th presidential election. So we should more rely on the realistic means and more military preparedness, by enhancing Korea-US alliance systems, especially sanctioning North Korea with more available means if they continue to develop nuclear weapons, to continue to test more missiles, including ultra high-speed missiles in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, and those Koreans living abroad, this kind of international politics and international security schemes are influencing the Korean politics in such a large measure as I have analyzed today. And I think this kind of analysis could help, help all the voters on and off the Korean Peninsula to have right decisions, to secure our liberal democratic systems with more promising futures. Thank you. I will get back to you later. This is Pak Teo TV analyzing the Korean politics and the international politics. Thank you.